Dear students, as you are aware that we are going to discuss Charles Lamb and his essay Dream Children in this video. What I'm going to do here is that we will divide this into two videos actually. So this lecture will be divided into two videos. Why I'm doing so is because of my, what you can say, infatuation for the romantic writers and the romantic literature. Being a very strong fan of romanticism and romantic literature, I am intending to discuss this essay and the writer in some detail. So that is why we will be dividing this lecture into two videos. In part 1, we will be talking about Lamb as an essayist, and we will do a kind of a analysis of the Dream Children. And in the second video, we will talk about the textual part, a sort of a summary or a sort of a critical analysis, something. So generally I'm in the habit of discussing the text first and then talking about the analysis of the essay. But here I'm reversing the order, talking about the essayist, and then I will not talk about the text. Rather, I will talk about a kind of an analysis of the essay first, and then in the second video we will attempt a critical summary. Students, you know that Lamb belongs to the romantic age, the romantic period. So it is quite natural that as a reader we will be looking for the presence of those romantic characteristics in the essays of Charles Lamb. And yes, we do find the presence of those romantic characteristics in the essay of Charles Lamb. He is certainly a very big name as an English essayist. He has been regarded as the prince of English essayists. And the authorities of literature, the scholars of English literature, readily agree on this point that his essays are the finest specimen of English prose. And the finest characteristics of romanticism, the finest qualities of romanticism are present in the essays of Lamb. As a reader, when we look at Charles Lamb's essays, we are bound to appreciate him. As a reader, we appreciate him for his wisdom. As a reader, we appreciate him for his humanity, for his genial humor. We appreciate him for his profound pathos. We appreciate him for his sweet temperament. And certainly, very importantly, we appreciate him even for his style. He was a very great and a very different kind of a prose stylist. When you study the life of Lamb, and I request you to study the life of Lamb. So when you will study the life of Charles Lamb, you will find that he belongs to a very lower class. And you will find that he came in contact with, a close contact with Coleridge, the great romantic. He was very much inspired and very highly influenced by Coleridge as a romantic writer. And that is why he began as a poet. Lamb began his literary career as a poet. Unfortunately, he did not succeed as a poet, and then he switched over to writing essays. And that was certainly a sort of a turning point, a very important, vital decision that he had taken. He acquired great recognition as an essayist. So, from the year 1820 to 1833, these 13-14 years, essay was his chief occupation. That was his main occupation. He wrote under the pen name of Elia. Some people pronounce it as Elia also. So, the first essay of Charles Lamb was published in the year 1820 in London Magazine. And his first volume, his first collection of essays was published in 1823. This collection was titled as Essays of Elia. The second volume turned out to be the last volume of his essays, and it was titled as Last Essays of Elia, and it was published in 1833. Lamb as an essayist is a wonder, and each essay is one little wonder in itself. We find a very fine combination of wit, fancy, anecdotes, and reflections in his essays. Students, let us talk one or two characteristics of Lamb as an essayist, and then we will discuss those characteristics also in some detail. The first and a very vital, a very important characteristic of Lamb as an essayist is his personal and autobiographical elements in his essays. You know, as a student of Romanticism, all of us know that subjectivity, the use of personal elements, autobiographical elements is certainly a very important part of Romanticism and Romantic literature. So, this personal and autobiographical element is present in the essays of Lamb. When we try to assess this characteristic and try to implement this on Charles Lamb and in his essays, we find, in his essays, we find that there is a great reflection of the nobility of his soul in his essays. His essays reflect the nobility of his soul. His essays reflect his good nature. His essays reflect the simplicity of Charles Lamb, the geniality of Charles Lamb. His essays are a great reflection of the element of charity that is there in the person of Charles Lamb. Friends, when you read his essays and when you try to assess his essays with the angle of personal and biographical element, you will find that Lamb is talking about his relatives in his essays. He's talking about his sister, he's talking about his mother, he's talking about his brother, he's talking about his relatives in his essays. He's talking about his friends in his essays. And he also talks about even his acquaintances in his essays. So this is also a part of his personal and autobiographical element. Another very important thing in this regard is that though he talks about the relatives, the acquaintances, though he talks about his friends in his essays, but he changes the name. He add a sort of a mystery in the persona of those real names and real characters. So he mystifies his characters. And this he does by blending facts and fiction. He blends fact and fiction together in his essays. But this blending of fact and fiction, this mystifying the character, this changing the name does not alter the truth. So the inherent truth remains there in his essays. Uh, he is very friendly with his reader. That is also a very important aspect of his being personal and autobiographical. That he takes his reader into his confidence. He establishes a very intimate relationship, a very close relationship with his readers, and he becomes very friendly with his readers. Very frankly, he tells about his childhood to his readers, about his boyhood to his readers. He talks about his manhood with his readers. And throughout his essay, he remains uniquely personal, all his essays. So he remains uniquely personal, uniquely, very typically autobiographical in almost all his essays. Humanity is visible in his essays. That is also a very important part of being personal and autobiographical, being subjective. Students, although he is autobiographical, he is subjective in his essays, but he never gives an impression of being vain or being proud in in his essays. He is the greatest egoist without the touch of egotism. Look here and listen to this very carefully. I'm trying to make a distinction between egoism and egotism. There was a presence of egoism in Lamb, but there was nothing like egotism in Lamb. He has been looked as, or he can be looked as, the greatest egoist in his essays without any touch of egotism. His essay, which we are going to study, The Dream Children, is a very good example of the presence of subjectivity, the presence of autobiographical elements in his essays. Moving over to another very important characteristic of Charles Lamb is that you can find a variety of theme in his essays, a lot of issues, a lot of subject matter. So you can find infinite variety. Lamb exhibits a variety of theme in his essays. And a very remarkable thing about this characteristic of variety of theme is that he is able to satisfy the need of every type of reader. He has all those material which can attract every kind of reader, be it a serious reader, a reader looking for some meaning, looking for some depth, or even a reader who is reading an essay, a Lamb's essay, for the sake of passing his time. So for every kind of reader, he has that material, that characteristic, that thing which can satisfy his reader. And earlier also I said that he reflects himself, he reveals himself rather in his essays. So this revealing the self also gives an opportunity to Lamb to add variety in his essays. And another very important thing is in this regard is that he is a great visualizer of memories. So this visualizing the memory also enables Charles Lamb to add a variety of themes in his essays. Another important characteristic which we talk about Lamb is the presence of humor and pathos. I'm taking this together, the presence of humor and pathos in the essays of Charles Lamb. So, friends, we look at Charles Lamb as a great humorist. And he is unsurpassable in English prose as a great humorist. No humorist in English literature, in English prose at least, is more original than Charles Lamb. His style, or the overall style of his essays, is expressive of his humor. He often interrupts. He's in the habit of a serious discussion is taking place in his essay, and suddenly he interrupts that serious discussion with a very light kind of a humor, with a very light kind of a jest. So he's in the habit of doing this. That his essays have all those shades of humor in his essays you can find. There is a presence of a very delicate kind of irony also that is there in his essays. You will find puns in his essays. You will find absurd details in his essays. You will find funny situations in his essays. Boisterous laughter will occur in his essays, you can say. So he's a very unique humorist. Harmless strokes of fun is there in his essays. But students, this element of humor is balanced with a tinge of sadness that is there in the essay of Charles Lamb, in the essays of Charles Lamb. This tinge of sadness, this vein of reflectiveness is there, which is running as an undercurrent in almost all his essays. So pathos is a very essential part of his humor. Pathos is a very essential part of his, a very essential aspect of his humor. Uh, it is the consciousness of the pathetic in life that made him laugh. So he laughs. He laughs at the pathetic. He becomes conscious of that pathetic, and then he laughs at that pathetic in his essays. He laughed to save himself from weeping. So this was Lamb. He was laughing on the pathetic. He was laughing in his essays to save himself from weeping. Friends, nostalgia, longing underlines his laughter. So, in short, you can say that the humor of Charles Lamb is blended with laughter and tears together. It is basically the humor in Charles Lamb is a blend of jest and tears. And his essay, The Dream Children, is very remarkable for this presence of humor and pathos together. So simultaneously, you will find the presence of humor in The Dream Children, and in the meantime, you will also find pathos running as an undercurrent in the essay. Another important characteristic of Charles Lamb is his prose style. I was talking earlier also that there are few writers who are being loved because of their styles, and Charles Lamb is one among them. So, what are the highlights of his prose style? Let us discuss a bit quickly. What are the highlights of Charles Lamb as a prose stylist? One is that his prose style is the expression of his personality. The style expresses his personality. Students, you must have heard a phrase when we were a student, we used to hear this: style is the man. So the style, the appearance you wear, the style you have is reflective of your persona, your personality, your thought process, everything. So the prose style of Charles Lamb is expressive of his personality. He has a very inimitable style, and his essays have the charm of poetry. They are poetic, highly poetic prose you will find in the writings, in the essays of Charles Lamb. A conversational ease is there in his prose style, in his essays. Epigrammatic depth is there in his essays. Emotional flexibility is there. Elusiveness is also a mark of his essay. So these things, conversational ease, epigrammatic depth, emotional flexibility, reminiscent elusiveness, these things are marks of his essays. His style is quite natural, original, and as far as influence, I mean, the influence of prose writers on Charles Lamb. As far as the influence of other prose writer is concerned, remember the 17th century prose writers like Brown, Burton, and Fuller. So he was inspired by these three 17th century prose writers, Brown, Burton, and Fuller. Uh, Quite often he uses archaic words, and this is again a very important romantic characteristic, using archaism in your writing. He sometimes uses Latinized words also, Latinized vocabulary also, and allusiveness, as I said, is a very important feature of his prose style. He uses quotes from the ancient writers also, from old writers also, and as we mentioned earlier also, that there is irony and there is pun in his essays. So Lamb is certainly the finest and the most charming of all English essayists. He brought the art of essay writing to perfection. Uh, his essays are a perennial source of interest. His essays are delight for the readers, and certainly he remains one of the best and one of the most loved essayists of English literature. Dear students, when you read the history of English prose and when you try to assess that who were the European writers who influenced English prose or English essay writing, you will find out a figure, a name very important, a very pertinent, a very important name that influenced the course of English prose, that influenced the name that influenced the course of English essay was that French writer Montaigne. This man, Montaigne, has been regarded as a sort of an inventor, or the one who started writing essays in European literature. So once Montaigne wrote, and I quote, "I am myself the matter of my book," unquote. I'm repeating. Montaigne says, and I quote, "I am myself the matter of my book," unquote. So this is, what is this? This is basically subjectivity. So this subjectivity defines the essay of Montaigne. This subjectivity also defines the essay of Lamb. Although Lamb never pays any tribute to Montaigne in his essays, he never mentions the name of Montaigne in his essays, but you will find a mark of Montaigne, the presence of Montaigne in the essays of Charles Lamb. Like Montaigne, Lamb also delved deep into the subjects of his essays. Like Montaigne, Lamb had a personal and a very personable style. Like Montaigne, he never asserted his point of view as an absolute authoritative point of view. So he never becomes authoritative. He never says that my point of view is the absolute. Both these writers, Lamb and Montaigne, they display their own kind of humanity in their essays. And essays, when you look at the course of European literature, essays written between the period of Montaigne in the 16th century and Lamb in the 19th century, when you look at this range, you will find that during the period between Montaigne and Lamb, the essays resembled philosophical texts. Here is a writer, Charles Lamb, who is making the essay personal, personable. Here is an essayist who is easygoing. Here is an essayist who is having a sort of a conversational style. So, by doing all these things, he was basically affirming the romantic movement. He was keeping himself faithful to the romantic movement. Friends, Lamb not only modernized the essay form, but he also helped in defining the essay as a truly personal form of writing. So, from philosophical, he made the essay personal. So, he not only modernized the essay as a form, as a literary form, but he also helped in defining the essay as a truly personal form of writing. Now, let us come to the analysis of Dream Children. And as I said, that I'm just reversing the process. I'll talk about the text later on in my next video. And here I'm presenting an analysis of Dream Children. Students, it's a unique essay. Dream Children is an essay that is channeling the logic and flow of a dream in a series of long sentences that are strung together like phrases. And in this, it is a very unique essay. I'm repeating how it is a very unique essay because it channels the logic and flow of a dream in a series of long sentences that are strung together and that appear as phrases, and there appear to be no paragraph breaks. Lamb very deftly uses the stylistic conceits to bring the reader, to pull the reader to a reverie, to a dream. He is trying to create a sense of tumbling through this dream world with its series of dovetailing tangents. In fact, the essay could prove confusing. In the first reading, it may prove confusing. It may prove hard to navigate, but it is for a time being only until as a reader you get to the end when there is a savvy twist. And what is that savvy twist? Lamb explains the formal oddness of the yarn that he has been spinning all along. So when you reach to the end of the essay, there is a twist at the end, and this twist has been explained by Lamb in the form of a formal oddness of the yarn that he has been spinning all along the essay. We as a reader, when we come to this twist, we as a reader are ripped out of that odd dream state into, and we are transferred into a familiar state, and we realize that it is Lamb sitting next to his sister talking about the children which are actually unreal. Friends, there is, as I said earlier when I was talking about Lamb as an essayist, he blurs the line between essay and fiction to very great extent in this essay. Lamb blurs the line between essay and fiction. He uses the typical interior facing autobiographical approach to make a room for a fictional narrative. Students, we know that in his real life, Lamb had a brother who was named as John Lamb. But in choosing the rare occasion to write of his real life brother in his vivid dream, Lamb seems to be choosing to write about a fantasized version of a real life. He is, look here, he is basically writing a fantasized version of the real life. There is a writer, a literary theorist rather, James Olney. In his book, Metaphors of Self, the Meaning of Autobiography. So in this book, Metaphors of Self, the Meaning of Autobiography, this literary theorist, James Olney, says that the most fruitful approach a writer can take in an autobiography is not to allow a formal or a historical one, but to see it in relation to the vital impulse to order that has always caused man to create, and that in the end determines both the nature and the form of what he creates. Students, this explanation of autobiography is very much true when we consider the essays of Charles Lamb. But it is doubly true when we consider the Dream Children. Here, in Dream Children, Lamb models this essay on a dream, bringing the fantasy that fuels the creative energy to the fore, blurring the lines between fantasy of his past life and that life to which he dedicates his writings. Uh, Allegory is a very important part of this essay. In the essay, the Dream Children, a Reverie, Elia recounts stories of his family to his children. And look here, what kind of children? Children who vanish when he starts talking about their mother. Children who vanish when he starts talking about their mother. So this account is a kind of an allegory for loneliness. Most of us know that Charles Lamb perhaps remained unmarried, or he did not have any children in reality. So this essay is an account that allegorizes Lamb's loneliness. As the children of Elia in the essay, the children of Elia in the essay literally disappear when he starts remembering his wife, of course, the imaginary wife. So these imaginary children were lost. So only in a dream does Elia have children to regale with his stories. Whereas in real life, he has just himself. Students, another very important characteristic of this essay is imagery. We get very affecting images, and especially the affecting image of Elia's children fading away as he begins to realize that he did not marry Alice and therefore he had no children by her. So, this fading from Elia's vision helped the reader understand Lamb's pain of having these lovely children so within his grasp only to disappear upon waking. Friends, it's a narrative essay. Dream Children is a narrative essay. Lamb is narrating the story of his dream that he had. In this dream, he came across his dream children that diminish at the end of the dream. This essay, dear students, exhibit the subjects of pain and guilt of getting deprived of the people whom we loved from the core of our heart. In this essay, Lamb is brought in a dream world to reveal the sweet recollections of the past. The essay, being enhanced with despair, clarifies the worth and necessity of childhood and the loved ones for an individual. The necessity of childhood and the necessity of the loved ones for an individual, without whom the life appears to be dark and suffocating for an individual. The reaction, dear students, in this essay, the reaction and the response the children in the essay reflect is the effect of the story on their mind, and it turns the essay dramatic. Moreover, the actions of the children were proof that the story that has been narrated to them by Lamb, by their father, have a great influence on them, and they were moved by the description of their father. The way their father described the whole story and the whole anecdote and everything. There is a shift in the tone of the essay at various points. Do remember that when we were talking about Lamb, the characteristics of Lamb as an essayist, he's in the habit of doing this, a shift in tone. He's talking very seriously and then suddenly he comes with a jest. So there is a shift in tone at various points in the essay, from humorous to tragic and vice versa. So all this occurred when the author describes the scene of his grandmother and about the death of his beloved brother. Lamb appears to be nostalgic throughout the essay, and he appears as if he is longing for his loved ones, for his dear ones. He also appears to be depressed throughout the essay, at least at the death of his beloved Alice. He appears to be depressed and feels guilty of not marrying her. And when we reach towards the end of the essay, there is a twist, which we have already mentioned earlier also. This twist comes when all the events in the story turn out to be a dream. And this twist adds suspense to the essay, and this makes the essay open-ended. There is an open end in the essay, and this is very important. As a student of literature, when you must have read about those literary terminologies, you should have read about the end, the different sort of end those the writers offer. So this open ending is a very important tool, a very important characteristic in the hand of the writer. So this essay and the twist that comes at the end of the essay, the realization that it was basically all a dream that he was having. So this adds a very element of suspense, a very element of open-endedness in the essay. So, friends, let us stop here. This video. I'm closing this video here, and do remember that we'll be having another video, the part two, in which I will discuss the summary of the essay. And I request you that once you hear that second video, the second lecture on the summary of this essay, I request you once again to come back to this analysis of the essay, and that will certainly, I hope that will be very helpful to you. Thank you very much.